Britain's gamble backfired spectacularly. Aircraft carriers as instruments of global dominance? Think again. For 300 years, world commerce danced to the tune of an unassuming London coffeehouse. While the British quietly determined which ships could sail and which could not, Trump was sharpening his blade. Lloyds of London yanked insurance coverage, expecting worldwide pandemonium, hoping to derail Trump's plans. What came instead? Not chaos. An executive order establishing the DFC. Within 24 hours, America had seized a market Britain spent centuries constructing. Want to witness imperial collapse in real time? Stay with me. The British Empire never truly vanished. It simply changed costumes. In 1688, a modest establishment called Edward Lloyd's Coffee House became the gathering spot where ship owners secured coverage for their vessels. Nothing complicated. Merchants exchanging words, shaking hands, scribbling signatures on slips of paper. That's it. That's how empires are built. 3 centuries forward. In 2026, Lloyd's of London still commands 30% of all global offshore energy insurance and 10% of marine hull premiums worldwide. Pause and absorb what those figures truly represent. Every supertanker, every liquefied natural gas carrier, every offshore drilling platform stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to the South China Sea, a substantial portion operates under coverage originating, directly or indirectly, from a single square mile in London's financial district. Now consider, what happens when Lloyd's refuses? This mechanism operates in shadows. They call it no cover, and it stands as perhaps history's most elegant weapon, leaving no evidence behind. A $200 million tanker lacking insurance transforms from vessel to floating catastrophe. No financial institution will fund its fuel. No harbor will grant it berth. Why? Because accidents demand payment, and without coverage, the captain bears that burden. No port authority anywhere accepts such exposure, so the ship sits idle. Oil sits idle. Contracts crumble. No missiles launched, no Security Council resolutions passed, just paper. Or rather, paper's absence. Hold this image. The mightiest weapon on earth is an unsigned line. Britain wielded this instrument for decades. When London decided Iranian oil exports had become problematic in 2010, before formal SWIFT sanctions, before executive orders, Lloyd's and the major protection and indemnity clubs simply began withdrawing coverage from vessels visiting Iranian ports. Ships halted, commerce froze. 85 million people felt economic pressure delivered not by warships, but by underwriters operating from postal code EC3. That's the game. That's the battlefield. Now witness what happens when someone flips the entire board. Operation Epic Fury launches February 28, 2026. Within 72 hours, Lloyd's syndicates and the major P&I clubs, the UK P&I Club, North of England, the Guard, issue formal notices withdrawing war risk coverage for vessels transiting the Arabian Gulf. The decision appears actuarial. Risk models indicate elevated threat environments. Premiums would be prohibitive. Coverage withdrawn. Technically actuarial, politically devastating. 150 tankers drop anchor at Hormuz's mouth. Let me translate that figure into something tangible. Those 150 vessels carry approximately 150 million barrels of oil. At March 2026 prices, roughly $12 billion in hydrocarbons sits motionless on water daily. They remain stationary. Someone pays demurrage fees every passing day. Contracts collapse. Refineries across South Korea, Japan, India begin draining strategic reserves. Margins run thinner than anyone publicly acknowledges. The Strait of Hormuz isn't merely an oil transit point. 25% of the world's seaborne oil passes through these waters. 20% of global LNG. When those 150 tankers freeze, the entire downstream supply chain, from German petrochemical facilities to Taiwanese semiconductor fabrication plants dependent on LNG for power, begins feeling the squeeze. This is systemic fragility viewed from inside. Here's the detail mainstream coverage almost entirely missed, buried beneath airstrike footage. Britain had already said no. Weeks before Epic Fury commenced, the Starmer government declined Washington's request to utilize Diego Garcia, the British Indian Ocean Territory base, arguably the single most strategically valuable piece of real estate in the Indo-Pacific for strike operations. Official language remained diplomatic. Functional meaning was unmistakable. London would not participate. So Washington proceeded without London. And London apparently decided that if it couldn't control military operations, it would control economic ones. The insurance withdrawal wasn't mere risk management. It was a message. You exploited our strategic geography without consent. Now run your war without our paperwork. I'm assigning no moral judgment here. I'm describing interests colliding with resources. Britain possessed one remaining lever of genuine global significance: the City of London's role as the world's risk underwriter. They pulled it. What they failed to anticipate was the response's velocity. March 3rd, 2026. Trump convenes no press conference. He holds no emergency National Security Council session, at least none producing memos. He posts on Truth Social. Characteristically blunt language, historically unprecedented substance. The U.S. Development Finance Corporation, the DFC, America's sovereign development bank possessing a $60 billion capital base, receives direction to provide political risk insurance for all commercial vessels transiting the Arabian Gulf. U.S. government-backed guarantees, period. Let me explain what just occurred, because financial media required 3 days to fully process it, and general media largely never did. The DFC exists to provide insurance and financing for American interests in developing markets. It was designed for projects in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, backing telecommunications, infrastructure, energy projects where private capital won't venture without sovereign backing. Trump applied that architecture to maritime trade insurance in an active conflict zone and used it to replace the London market entirely. Consider the logic from a pure power perspective. Lloyd's withdraws coverage because risk runs too high. Fine. The DFC steps in, declaring the U.S. Treasury is now your counterparty. Sail through the Gulf, you're covered. Not by a syndicate of Lloyd's names in EC3, but by the full faith and credit of the United States government. What does a ship owner do when offered that choice? They sail. Within 48 hours of the DFC announcement, 14 tanker operators publicly confirmed Gulf transits proceeding under U.S. sovereign guarantee. Lloyd's withdrawal had effectively become irrelevant. Financial consequences for London arrived immediately and structurally. Marine and energy insurance doesn't represent some small corner of the Lloyd's market. It forms the entire ecosystem's foundation. Premiums from Gulf energy shipping underwrite broker relationships, reinsurance relationships, credit relationships, extending across the entire London market. When those premiums evaporate, downstream effects cascade. London's financial sector generates approximately 9% of UK GDP. When meaningful portions of the world's maritime insurance business migrate from British sovereign guarantee to American, not temporarily, not as wartime exception, but as structural new reality, arithmetic for the UK economy becomes uncomfortable rapidly. Britain attempted blocking a base. Trump struck what Britain couldn't afford losing. This is economic warfare at sovereign level. No tariff schedules, no WTO complaints, just a guarantee and the sudden, very public obsolescence of someone else's guarantee. While London absorbed implications, the rest of the world did something more practical. It made new arrangements. Germany moved first and fast. Chancellor Friedrich Merz had already signaled before Epic Fury that Germany's energy policy framework required reassessment. The nuclear exit, the Energiewende's most controversial chapter, he called it publicly what German conservatives had privately said for years, a strategic mistake, not ideological position. A resource calculation. Germany requires baseload power. It possesses no domestic hydrocarbons of consequence. Its industrial competitiveness, the entire German manufacturing model making Volkswagen, BASF, and Siemens possible, depends on predictable, affordable energy. When the Hormuz logjam froze LNG supplies and spot prices spiked, this wasn't geopolitical abstraction in Berlin. It was a factory floor problem, an industrial orders problem, a jobs problem. Merz didn't denounce Trump. He called Washington. In doing so, he effectively declared something European political commentary still refuses to fully acknowledge. The era of European strategic autonomy as a coherent project is finished. When pressure becomes real, not theoretical, not a think tank scenario, Germany chooses energy security and the transatlantic relationship over solidarity with a British government possessing no energy to offer and no fleet to project. China, meanwhile, had never played by these rules whatsoever. Here's the fact sitting at the Hormuz story's center that Western analysis consistently underweights. While 150 Western-insured tankers sat anchored at the strait, Chinese-flagged and Chinese-insured vessels continued moving. China spent the better part of a decade building exactly the parallel infrastructure making this possible. The Gray Fleet, tankers operating outside Western insurance and financial systems, many of them sanctioned vessels carrying Iranian and Russian crude, gave China a template. State-owned insurance through entities like Sinosure and the PICC Group provides sovereign backing without reference to Lloyds, without reference to London P&I clubs, without reference to any Western financial institution. China didn't circumvent the system in March 2026. China had already built the exit door. And here's what the OSINT community surfaced during the crisis, the detail making Western defense establishments genuinely uncomfortable. Chinese commercial satellite startups using openly available imagery, the kind sold to anyone with a credit card and research subscription, were tracking the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group and Patriot battery deployments in near real time, publishing data openly. The invisible American military was suddenly publicly visible to anyone caring to look. Strategic ambiguity that U.S. power projection historically depended upon, uncertainty about where assets are, what they can reach, was being dissolved by a Chinese commercial startup in Shenzhen. This is the new environment, not the Cold War's two-sided secrecy, a world where your aircraft carrier's position becomes a data set. In that world, the Trump administration made an underappreciated pragmatic decision: go direct. The Trump-Xi summit being prepared for March 31st, 2026 isn't negotiation between adversaries in traditional sense. It's two sovereigns dividing practical questions about who controls which corridor under what guarantee at what cost. The relationship's framing, competition, rivalry, strategic decoupling, doesn't disappear. But beneath it, something more durable is being established, operating agreements between the only two powers capable of actually enforcing them. Mayers occupies the room or sits adjacent to it, representing European industrial capacity needing the deal to work. Starmer is not in the room. Not because he wasn't formally invited, because Britain has nothing left to put on the table that either Washington or Beijing needs. Let me be precise about the military dimension because it's easily either over-romanticized or under-analyzed. Operation Epic Fury in the 48 hours following its February 28th initiation involved over 2,000 strike sorties conducted by U.S. and Israeli air assets. The target set was specific and ambitious: 300 Iranian ballistic missile launchers, the dispersed road mobile systems representing Tehran's primary deterrent against regional intervention, and the Natanz nuclear enrichment facility, the symbolic and functional center of Iran's nuclear program. That air campaign's scale carries historical significance. 2,000 sorties in 48 hours matches or exceeds Operation Desert Storm's opening phase. The logistics required, tanker support, seed packages, intelligence fusion, targeting coordination with Israeli F-35s, represent American air power's full weight applied without hesitation. Those 300 launchers matter because they're why carrier strike groups hesitate in the Gulf. Iranian anti-ship ballistic missiles, the College Fars and its successors, represent genuine threats to surface combatants at ranges making the Gulf a contested environment. Eliminating that launcher network changes the entire region's military geometry. Natanz matters because it represents the program, not the only facility, not the final word, but the symbol, the technical heart, the point around which a decade of diplomacy has circled. And here's the observation I offer, not conclusion, just framing. Military dominance historically has been considered sufficient. Control the skies, control the ground, control the sea, you win. But in March 2026, the United States Air Force and the Israeli Air Force conducted one of the most successful air campaigns in recent memory. Simultaneously, a group of insurance underwriters in London nearly paralyzed the economic rationale for conducting it. You can win the air war and lose the trade war. You can destroy 300 missile launchers and watch your allies' oil supplies freeze because a market in the city of London decided risk premiums ran too high. Trump understood this, whether instinctively or through explicit analysis. The DFC move answered a question military commanders traditionally don't ask. Who controls the economic conditions under which military victory becomes meaningful? The answer, until March 2026, was London. After March 2026, the answer begins changing. I've provided facts as I understand them, the timeline, the numbers, the sequence of decisions. Here's what I won't do. I won't tell you this is good or bad. I won't tell you the world is safer or more dangerous. I won't tell you Trump was right or London was wrong. What I will tell you is this. For 300 years, global trade architecture rested on a specific assumption, that risk could only be legitimized through a private market based in London. That assumption created enormous stability and enormous dependency simultaneously. It gave Britain a form of power outlasting its navy, outlasting its empire, outlasting its manufacturing base. In roughly 72 hours during early March 2026, that assumption was tested by a sovereign guarantee. The sovereign guarantee won. What replaces it remains unclear. A world where trade routes are guaranteed by the U.S. Treasury rather than Lloyd's syndicates is a different world. Not obviously better or worse, but structurally different. A world where access to trade becomes a function of geopolitical alignment rather than actuarial tables, where the question isn't, can you afford the premium, but are you inside the American security perimeter or outside it? That question carries enormous implications for numerous countries that spent decades trying not to answer it. Tankers move again through the Strait of Hormuz. Oil flows. Numbers recover. But the paper empire, the one running on signatures and syndicates and the quiet authority of a market in the City of London, that is not recovering. Some structures, once cracked, don't heal. They reorganize around the fracture. We are living in the reorganization. For 3 centuries, London determined who floated and who remained still. Now Washington holds that power. Tell me in the comments, is this a change of rules or merely a change of jailer?